All right, what's up, everybody? Thank you for joining Chapter 7 of the conversation between Mark Cowan and myself. Today, we're going to talk about process orchestration. Mark, how are you today?
I'm great, Jim. Nice to be spending some time with you as always.
Wonderful. Let's jump right in. Let's
Indeed.
talk about the problem. So I see the opportunity for process orchestration as a huge miss for big enterprises. There are not only line of business silos, but technology silos. And in order to pull off what a marketer needs, everything really needs to be orchestrated and integrated. But the problem here we're going to talk about now, you're going to shed some light on. First of all, handoffs are very brittle. There's no scalability in any dimension, and marketers don't get what they need. Can you spend a minute or so talking about the problem today and what you see out there in the marketplace and how you can solve it?
Sure. I will say that one of the key unlocks inside of any enterprise is process. How do you standardize? How do you scale? How do you make things work across multiple different parts of the organization and across multiple different touch points? One of the main problems that you talk about in terms of being brittle is that today, many marketers have bought applications that are best of breed, and as they probably still will, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, they have come with pre-built connectors. These pre-built connectors are point-to-point connectors, and by definition, they are solving a very point problem. Now, the issue is that when you start uh, connecting these together, you end up creating a fabric that's brittle by definition. Because as one piece breaks or another piece moves, everything else, decomposes around that. And so it doesn't allow you to scale. And so therefore, just from a data movement perspective, you can't even begin to create your processes. And for example, what I mean by this is, if you think about the one-to-many processes you have, as opposed to one-to-one processes. So an example of a one-to-one process in the marketing world, when you think about marketing automation systems and CRM systems, is like, oh, hey, I've captured a new lead on a form, and it goes and creates a new lead or updates a contact, whatever it may be inside the CRM system. That's a one-to-one. That's not a lead to a contact or a lead to a customer-based process, which are one-to-many. That customer or that contact needs to be created simultaneously or updated in multiple different systems and trigger different processes across those systems simultaneously. That's where the process orchestration piece comes in here. And so when we think about, kind of the one-to-ones, they create brittle environments. When we think about process orchestration, these are the key unlocks that are going to allow you to scale. And by happenstance, also become more independent of the underlying vendor technology that you are, depending on or riding on.
For me, again, getting back to what I believe is the big miss, it's all about the right message at the right time to the right customer. But I can't stress enough, it's extremely hard to articulate that when systems are disjointed, or when you're waiting for, say, some intelligence from an analytics department or an insights department, or somebody putting together a campaign or marketing automation capability. Again, we all know why it's very important to do this kind of in real time, to create a real-time experience, personalization and scale and everything else. But why is it so hard for the enterprise to bring all this together across all of the engagement points?
I think there's a lot of answers to that question. But I think the core theme is around centralizing, or at least taking a centralized view of how a process spans across an organization, right? The real answer is to not be able to, and I don't want to jump into a solution, but the real answer is to think about these things in advance as part of your design. Maybe you have to solve a problem tactically, but it ultimately is a strategic problem that needs to be solved. And so you kind of have to, let both thoughts occupy your mind at the same time.
Talk about the process. One of the things I used to always like to say is, it's like buying a really expensive pair of sneakers and forgetting to tie your shoelaces ahead of a marathon. Little things can trip up the enterprise. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you typically put in place with your customers and how it solves some of that shoelace problem?
Sure. The reality inside of any enterprise or organization is that there's a sunk, or at least an implied sunk cost in terms of the technology that's already in place. So it's not about ripping and replacing technology you have. It's about augmenting it with, smarts. And some of those smarts are, listeners, what we call inside Put It Forward. You can think of them as, trigger-based event connectors things that happen or trigger other events to happen based on something happening in a source system, such as, oh, hey, there's a new customer here, or that customer is, is new, but it also has a profile or a demographic or a certain set of attributes to it that mean that something else should happen, and that something else that should happen has to, be triggered across 2 or 3 or 4 different types of sub processes that are attached to that. And so what you do is you look for a set of conditions, right? Like if A, then, if A equals 1, if B equals 2, then do something else, as an example. And the moment those conditions are met, right, is when you actually fire off the, the event or the trigger that you're trying to solve for. Not before, not based on the calendar, not based on, a particular moment in time, but based on when the conditions are met by a moment and met at a moment in time. Then you actually trigger that off. So it's not just about, dumb data movement. It's about, some intelligence when this process is actually, going to be triggered and so on. And then these things ultimately, drive downstream or related processes that are associated with that.
So in terms of the results, is it fair to say that when putting together, for example, an architecture, you need to think a layer above the applications, the core systems, the marketing technology, et cetera, to be able to make decisions independent of the underlying systems, like kind of define your perfect world and then figure out how to connect all the parts to pull off the story.
Yeah, there's actually a really simple way to think about it. One is that all the functionality and the things that you need to do happen below the API in an application, right? They're contained inside the box. The things that you need to do that span those different applications are above the API. And that's where we spend our time because we have a view about, where value is. But if you kind of just draw the demarcation line there about, okay, hey, an internal, small process or data capture or whatever it is that you may be doing sits below the API. It's inside the app. As soon as it needs to be shared or impacts something else, it's above the API. And therefore, that's when you start thinking about an orchestration type function. Now, orchestrations, by the way, can be very simple or they can be complex. I don't want to create the illusion that, everything has to be overthought. An orchestration may be, one step. Hey, go do this. But it also may be 3 steps. And it also may be a forked process where, it does one thing and 3 things. It creates one event, but that one event happens in 3 places in parallel.
What you just said there is something that I like to use commonly is sometimes orchestration rather than sophistication is how you make progress.
Often it's because that's a good one. Because it boils down to efficiency of resources that you have, right? Gives you better scale.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
So key takeaways that I see from this is obviously orchestration has to span all of the systems or processes that are triggered by threshold events, as you refer to them. That enables us to create more meaningful experiences for the customers, and of course, in real time. Also, we have a lot of this capability already within house systems, but the problem is that above the API, as you refer to it, is critical to give greater flexibility. Anything else you'd like to add to these key takeaways or where customers should really focus? And again, not boil the ocean, but simplify how they operate.
The only thing I would add to that, and this is a good summary, but the only thing I would add to that is that there's different classes of processes. And one of the things that can help you get started is just to classify them. For example, you could have a human-centric workflow or process. You could have a machine-centric, you could have an event-centric. An example of, a human-centric one is a document approval or something like that. It involves individuals, collaborating with one another. A machine-centric may be, hey, we've reached a threshold of performance inside a machine or something, and therefore something else has to happen. And a process-centric one may be like what we spoke about earlier, which is a lead to new customer or customer creation that touches a lot of different things. And it also works in reverse the other way, such as we have a customer that has a problem in one area, and therefore it needs to alert or inform the other systems or interdependent processes about that as well. So it's bidirectional is the nut.
Excellent. So the net takeaway, distilling all of this down finally, is basically if stuff is not integrated and orchestrated correctly, you leave a lot of marketing capability on the table. Fair to say?
Very fair to say. Thank you for
Excellent.
summarizing.
Well, thank you, Mark, again for chapter 7, and look forward to reconnecting again for the next chapter.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, Jim. Always a pleasure.